Mr. Jame Murphy, legendary guitar player, producer, and engineer. How you doing, dude?
I'm doing great, man. Doing great. A little chilly morning here, but it's already warming up quite a bit, as Florida is likely to do.
Yeah, it's been raining like crazy. I live in Oregon, and it's been record temperatures. I think every month this year we've set a record, and I know it was like 61 degrees in Portland, and
Right.
it's been raining, flooding like crazy. But James, what have you been up to lately? I've seen that you've been posting some videos that you're doing lots of guitar playing and guest solos and stuff. So what are you working on right now?
I have a right this moment. I'm working on solos for a few different clients. What's on deck right this second is Embryonic Autopsy. I am doing 3 solos on their new album.
That's awesome, man. I mean, you've done a lot of work. I mean, your career is legendary. Like, I thought I knew like most of the stuff that you had done, but then after doing some research, it's just like, wow, like so many things. Like, I never knew that you were an Agent Steel, and I just watched a video, I think, from like live at the Hammersmith or something like that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Man, I don't know. It was pretty awesome, dude. Like, that was good stuff.
Right on, man. Well, to the extent that you enjoyed it, I'm happy.
Well, hey, you know, I thought it was good, dude. And that being said, I remember the first time that I heard your playing was actually on Testament's live at the Fillmore. And I was super like surprised that you were playing a Strat. And I just thought, you know, how unique your guitar sound was and your style was, especially, you know, revisiting the death metal stuff. So what were your early influences as a guitar player?
Oh, man. I probably had kind of a typical story of you know, Gen Xers of my age. You know, we were born in the late 60s and early 70s. So by the, you know, for me, by the mid 70s, I was already a little Kiss fan. And in fact, the very first concert I ever went to was Kiss. My dad took me, probably the nicest thing he ever did for me as a kid. I think I was like 11 years old, and I sat on his shoulders. You know, he held me up on his shoulders for the majority of the concert, which was, you know, great view. And he was no Kiss fan, trust me. So it was just a nice thing he did for me.
Man, that's awesome. You know, that's a pretty rare story. And I mean, especially like 11 years old to go see Kiss, like that probably taught you a lot about rock and roll right there.
Well, you know, I was just starstruck, you know, I was starstruck. I was so starstruck that, you know, they had this was in Amarillo, Texas, by the way. My dad was briefly stationed there when he was in the, you know, Army. And, you know, so it was 1979, and it was the Dynasty tour, the last tour where they still had never taken off the makeup and they still had all 4 original guys. So, yeah. There was some Kiss, what's the word? Impersonators, you know what I mean? Like, I guess they were sort of there officially, but you know, they were allowed by Kiss to do it. I don't know how many shows they did it at, but they did it. They came out into the audience and were shaking people's hands and all this stuff, but they were I don't think impersonators is the right word I'm looking for right now. I'm having a bit of a brain freeze on that, but they were dressed up as Kiss in full makeup and everything, but something was a little bit off. And I remember I was so excited. I wanted to get over there and get autographs. I wanted to meet them. I didn't know that they were, you know, impersonators. But I just sort of thought, in the back of my mind, I thought, yeah, this is really cool. I hope they come over here. And my dad didn't know. He had no idea. He thought it was Kiss as well. He didn't know anything about them. So I kept hoping that, you know, I'd be able to, you know, we'd be able to inch our way over there. And my dad wasn't really keen to fight the crowd, you know, and people didn't seem as excited as they should have been, but they were getting pretty well swarmed, you know. But it sort of seemed like, man, it seems like if Kiss was out here, people would be going nuts. And they just look a little bit off. just something a little bit off. The costumes themselves, the makeup, like they just look a little different in person, you know. And then, of course, the concert started, and I realized, oh, that wasn't Kiss at all.
Oh, that's awesome, man! Like
that's Kiss, you know, on stage, you know. So, yeah, it was fun. Like I said, you know, he let me. I was pretty small at 11, so you know, I sat most of the concert on his shoulder, so it afforded me an awesome freaking view. And I just remember taking away from it, just being awestruck. You know,
oh,
at
I
how
bet.
cool they looked, at how great their stage show was put together. I didn't even know terms like that, like stage show and perform. You know, I just knew it was an experience, you know, and that the whole experience was pretty freaking awesome. Sorry,
Man, that's awesome. Like learning from Kiss about, like you said, the stage show and the production and everything. And that's pretty funny, you know, to get to see some Kiss impersonators. It's kind of like seeing Elvis, you know what I mean? Like an Elvis impersonator. It's close to the real thing, but you can always tell like the Wish version of these guys. But one thing I got to say is I noticed that you brought like the shred to death metal, dude. Like I know there was other people out there, but that's really, in my opinion, one thing that you did is that you always elevated every band that you played in. And
well, thanks, man.
yeah, and I mean it speaks for itself, dude, and without a doubt. So what was the first record that you were on from that era, from the late 80s? What was the first thing that you actually played on?
I was never on an album in the late 80s. I did record my first album in the late 80s. Late summer into fall of 1989 is when we were in the studio recording Spiritual Healing. And that was my very first actual album release. Now, I had done that tour with Agent Steel, 2 years prior. But, it was, I was not happy in that situation. I won't go into too much detail about that because that in itself takes forever. But I was almost a little bit disillusioned about what the music business was even like. But luckily, I met a lot of cool people on that tour that taught me, like, no, everyone isn't like this. A lot of people are really cool. And I was like, okay, great, awesome. Well, I'll stick it out. I'm just not going to stick it out with these guys, And, but of course, I did do the tour. I finished the tour, and that was, the very first thing I did. Now, some of that, as you alluded to earlier when we were talking before we started, some of that has been released, and some of it's like on CD, like some of the live stuff that I did. It's out there on versions of their, I think, of the Unstoppable Force album. I think there's a version with bonus tracks, and that some of those live tracks are on there. And of course, that album came out in 1987, but I actually don't think that version with the bonus tracks was released until sometime in the aughts. Actually, so really, my first album was Spiritual Healing in 1990. It was recorded in '89, but that was my first.
When you guys were recording Spiritual Healing and you were working on it, did you guys know how like monumental that album was going to be? Did you have a sense of like how it was going to change things?
Oh, dude, I didn't necessarily understand that it was going to be key in helping bring death metal to prominence. I, like almost everybody back then, including Chuck, sort of thought that death metal was just a small subgenre that was sort of we were already seeing how it was going to burn out. I mean, we had a couple of other subgenres of metal burn out and sort of disappear, in the lead up to that album coming out. Like, in the going back to the tour I did with Agent Steel in 1987, speed metal was still a common term. It was still, And by the time we did that album and it was coming out, no one said that anymore. They were just saying thrash, death metal and various other, power metal, this, that, and the other. But speed metal is the usage of that subgenre name had kind of disappeared, and a lot of the sort of bands in it were already on their way. They were dwindling and dying off, and or just full on embracing thrash or death metal or some other variation, and leaning more towards the proclivities of those particular genres. In fact, if you ask me right now what the defining traits of speed metal were, I'd probably have a hard time to tell you exactly. But it was somewhere. It was kind of a nexus somewhere between what became thrash and almost what became power metal. Because there was, like for instance, Agent of Steel was called speed metal, and had the very high pitched, Queensryche typey, power metal-ish type of vocals, but had very distinct, thrash elements in the instrument, the music. So I didn't necessarily, to try to get back to answer your question. I didn't necessarily understand at the time. Sorry. I'm having some dental surgery soon, and I'm wearing like a prosthesis to help with that as that date approaches, and it causes me a little bit of a lisp at times. It's not my normal voice.
It's all good, man. I appreciate you
telling stories. Is this going to be video or audio? I'm asking. I'd like to...
It's going to be video.
But yeah, I just have to have something to keep for my palate, because there's going to be some surgery back there. So, anyway, yeah, I don't know that I necessarily understood that it was going to, that death metal itself was going to take off. But trust me, I believed in that record, and I thought we were going to be huge from it. I didn't know that it would. It took some years still. I mean, that album did take off, and it did do quite well for the band. And, I got to say, I probably earned more money on that tour than I did in any other tour I ever did, including the tours I did with Testament. There were other perks to being in Testament, but, it wasn't necessarily about the money. And I was young enough at all those times that none of it was about the money to me. I wanted to make records and tour. And so that's what I was doing. And when we would get asked, what our opinion of the record, when we were doing the interviews contemporaneous to Spiritual coming out, when we were doing those interviews, I would get asked, I was cocky about it. I was like, oh, this is going to be this band's Rain and Blood. We're just going to blow up. It's big. People are going to love it. I was so into it that I just believed that other people would have to be. And, it did turn out to be true. It took a little longer to develop, had a slower arc than, than a Rain and Blood, or anything. But I thought, oh, this is the band's, third album, and it's so good. It's the same, but also a departure, the same way kind of Rain of Blood was for, So I was hyper confident that we were going to be successful. But I thought that while our music would stay largely the same, I thought that we would transcend the death metal genre name, the tag of that name. Not the style so much, but I thought we would bring that style to the mainstream, and it would just get incorporated into what people think of as, metal at large. And that also has become kind of true to a certain extent. Of course, we still have the genre, the subgenre name, death metal, and it's, it's bigger, it's in more use than ever, and the genre itself is still hugely popular around the world. So it's that went contrary to my expectation, but it wasn't a bad, it wasn't that I didn't like it. I loved it, absolutely loved. Then, it's just the way I thought things were going to go.
Man, that's it's such a huge record as far as like stylistically changing death metal. I think it like, especially for just Death, like, I mean, I'm a fan of the first two records, but like when Spiritual Healing, I remember having that on a cassette I got in a Oshkosh Bagosh bag from like this older cousin of mine. And I remember like that album and Rust in Peace were like the two things I lived off of for I don't know how, like 2 years, just every day listening to those two records. And I mean,
Right.
Spiritual Healing, dude, like you brought like the melodicism to death metal, like with your solos and stuff and your lead work. And like what was it like working with Chuck in that context? Was it just like you guys would just bounce ideas off each other, or was it more like you guys had songs written and then brought them to the band?
Could you repeat that again? I was kind of.
Oh, it's all good, man. Yeah. So what was the writing process like working with Chuck? Was it you guys had ideas you collaborated on a lot, or was it like you guys each had like your own singular ideas that you brought to the table?
Well, for me, I had been living up in Atlanta, and I moved up there in early '89, and I had become roommates with Dave Stewart of Hallows Eve, and the guitar player, and we were talking with Tommy Stewart, no relation, different spelling, the bass player, and about perhaps reviving Hallows Eve, and sending demos to Metal Blade. Metal Blade was interested to hear what we would come up with. I said, well, let's hear demos. Maybe we'll do another record with you. Monuments hadn't been out that long, Hallows Eve albums, so I was writing music with them, and that's where my head was at when I actually got the call from Death. So I hadn't had a lot of time to write necessarily music that I would have thought was appropriate for Death in advance. So I didn't really have anything in advance. And when I came into the band, it was like, I don't know, something like August of '89. And I showed up at, my first official day of rehearsal. They were like, okay, we have 4 songs completed. We want to write 4 more. And I was like, okay, great. And we spent that first day, they spent that first day teaching me those songs. So I learned those songs and we ran through them, and I got them down really quick, and we went through them, and it was sounding really solid and good. I already started coming up with solo ideas and all that, and the next day we're like, okay, we've got some ideas for another song, and they started playing their ideas, and then they came to a point and stopped, and we're like, this is like, we kind of need something here. Do you have anything you think would fit here? And I just confidently said, yeah, I do. And I got something here. And I had nothing. So I just started playing, and it was something like, I don't know, when we get to that point of the song, it's like, oh God, I got to remember it. That one and the next riff after it, I just pulled those out of my ass, probably. It's not anything I ever played before, but it's what the track they played me up to that point made me feel. I didn't necessarily tell them, yeah, I'm making this up on the spot. I just said, that part makes me feel like maybe this riff here, and I played it. As far as they knew, it was a riff I had in my back pocket for a while, but I didn't. And they liked it. And the rest of the writing of the 4 songs went the same way. The rest of that song and the other 3 songs I contributed heavily to on the riff, side of things. Simply because they were still in progress. So when they played the ideas, they'd get to a certain point, at least on 3 of them, then I would make a contribution by speaking up and saying, oh yeah, this would fit there. And it was just what I felt at the moment from the first time they played it for me. I learned it up to that point, and we'd get to the point where it needed something, and I would just pull something out, Usually literally right out of my ass. I had no idea what I was doing. The only exception to that was I think it's Killing Spree. We had taken a little break, and we were in these like rehearsal studios that were basically storage facility. That's quite a popular band rehearsal situation. And it was, I think, Skipper Road facility in Tampa, which was sort of famous. It had everybody in there.
That's awesome.
No, I take that back. I'm sorry. That was where I rehearsed with. That's where Disincarnate had their room. The Death room was in Altamont Springs. Yeah, so that was completely different. I think there were other bands in there, but I don't remember ever seeing any. Sorry, I was conflating the two bands. Yeah, but it was hot. We had big fans and stuff in there, but there was no AC. And this was August, mind you, So, which is leading to September, but you don't start getting cold weather in Florida until November, and then it's just like mornings, overnight and mornings. But so it was blazing, and so we took a break, and we'd open the door, we'd turn our amps down really, really low, so we sort of continue just sort of hashing ideas or whatever. But Chuck had put his guitar down, he was having a beverage, and he was just standing out catching whatever little bit of breeze there was, and I was just walking like sort of around in like a little circle, and I was just doing a finger exercise to keep my hands warm. It was just... I was just doing that as a finger exercise. And Chuck, like after a few repetitions of me doing that, Chuck said, "James, what is that?" And I was just like, "Oh, it's finger exercise." And he's like, "Well, keep doing it." And so I just kept it going. And he's going over and putting on his guitar, matching his volume to me, because we had the amps on really low. And he matched his volume to me pretty much. And he's like, and he just sat there and listened. And he kind of timed it out. And he's like, started playing the chords underneath, which I knew at one point. I forgot right now. I don't want to figure it out right now. But it was, he just started playing those chords.
That's awesome, man.
Within a couple passes, he had it nailed down at exactly what he wanted it to be. And it was gelling, and we're like, okay, well, this is a great intro to a song. And we're like, yeah, let's write the rest of it. So we went in the rehearsal space and started working on the rest of it.
Man, that's awesome. And that's true collaboration too. And it's a rare thing, I think, especially with music that's demanding, is that it's a true, back and forth effort instead of somebody's like, here's the song, learn how to play it. So after you moved on from Death, you went into Obituary. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you guys did Cause of Death, which is another great album. And the solos on Cause of Death are just, the title track especially, but all those solos are killer. And, what was it like working with Obituary?
It was cool, man. They're just, they were just, pretty chill Florida boys, and it was fun. It was pretty easy right off the bat. When I very first went in, my first day with Obituary was showing up at the studio to talk with them about whether I was going to be the guy or not. They didn't audition me per se at all. They were just like, yeah, we know you can do it. You've been touring with making a record, made a record and have been touring with Death. So you can do it. That's, they just wanted to meet me and see if we could get along personably. And, I'm a very different type of person than them. But, generally I can get along with everybody. And, all my family are, Florida people, laid back Florida, Southern people, and, good old boys / rednecks, and, so I know them, but I never was, I think I chalk it up to the fact that I was an Army brat. I lived all over the world, 6 years in Germany during junior high and high school, and, yeah, it was, a really different experience growing up for me than most people whose home base is Florida. They grew up around here, and I didn't. And I never developed, certain habits. Like I enjoyed a little bit of, the herb when I was in high school, mostly just to hang with my friends, but but once I stopped doing it, which is right after I got out of high school, I never really developed the taste for it or the desire to ever enjoy it again. And those guys, they enjoy their recreational, herbs, and more power to them. Almost everybody I know does, and I have no problem with it at all. But I didn't necessarily gel with them right off the bat, and they had lost their metal brother. They had lost Al. He had ducked out because he was having a kid, and he didn't really know whether Obituary was going to be, to use a fancy word, remunerative, and fumble it really bad, remunerative. Whether he was going to make some cash on it, or enough to support his family. Yeah,
Right.
He was rightfully worried about that, as anyone who's a new father should be, concerned about how to provide. And so he had ducked out under, not necessarily because he wanted out, but because he had responsibilities. And they didn't want him to go, they honored his what he wanted to do. But they made it a point to tell me, when I came in on that first day and chatted with them at Morristown, like, okay, we know you can do it, so we're down, but you have to just know that Alan is our boy, and if he were to decide to come back, we will probably take him back. And I was like, okay, so it might be a temporary position. Understood, accepted. Right then and there, I started making up my mind. Okay, I'm going to do this record. I'm going to tour with these guys. I'm going to stay in the band as long as they want me. But I'm going to start working on some music on the side. And if Al does come back, I'm going to roll into that and do my own thing rather than joining someone else's band again. And that's pretty much exactly what happened. Al came back. I rolled over and I rolled over into Disincarnate. Remember, I had some of the riffs well before I left, because like I said, I started writing almost right away. And I remember at one point Trevor had asked me if I had any riffs, and I was like, yeah, I've been working on a bunch of riffs, but they're nothing like Obituary. I mean, we were just hanging around rehearsal one day, and I guess thoughts of a next album coming up, and I guess he was trying to figure out, okay, is James even going to be able to write with us? Because sure, he wrote with Death, but we don't sound like Death. And let's see if he can write with us. If he can write Obituary appropriate material. And I absolutely could have had it come up in the exact same way that it did with Death. If we had just gotten in the rehearsal room and they would have said, yeah, we got this and this and we need something here, and I would have been like, how about this? And and I would have written in the Obituary style then. But I was writing this material very distinctly to be my stuff. So when Trevor asked me if I had riffs, I was like, yeah, but they're not Obituary. He wanted to hear them anyway, so I played them for him, and he was like, yeah, that doesn't sound nothing like Obituary. Like, yeah, I told you that. So, and I think that he probably formed a judgment at that moment that I couldn't write Obituary style, that was the style I wrote, and I couldn't write Obituary style. That would have been incorrect of him, but it didn't matter. It was a moot point because Alan did, in fact, come back. And, and also I was a different enough person than them, and we were young enough, all of us, inexperienced necessarily at going out into the world and being able to get along and deal with other kinds of people, that had different pastimes, that thought different things, sure, you can, getting along with people is one thing, but living with them in a tiny vehicle and with them every day for months on end is a different thing. And when you add to that I was a little bit of a unhappy camper at that time, I was not super happy in life about a lot of and business about a number of things, and I was not good at communication back then. I'm much better at, like, I can see a tension building. I'm better at not contributing to building tensions, and that when I see them, I'm good at, like, voicing what needs to be voiced in a way that it needs to be done. I was not back then at all. So the way I dealt with it was I tried to bottle it up, and keep it to, just keep it to myself. But of course, shit like that bubbles over, it bubbles over, it leaks out into your actions and your demeanor. And, so, frankly, I probably would have been, that would have been my only album and tour cycle with Obituary, regardless of whether Al came back or not. So it was good that I had, it was smart. It was, that I had started working on Disincarnate material.
Yeah, and I mean, Disincarnate, Dreams of the Carry On Kind, that album was freaking awesome too. Like, in my opinion, like, for whatever it's worth, like, that was like the first true, straight up, in my opinion, technical death metal album. Like, they had blast beats in it, had the crazy guitar playing. And like you said, like, I don't necessarily, like, like writing for Obituary, what you totally could have done, that Disincarnate, those riffs were like a whole other animal. That was like beyond any, like, Pestilence or anybody else at the time. I mean, that was really pushing the envelope on Disincarnate. And what was that like?
Well, it sort of segues back with Obituary, because I started working on that stuff alone, like in isolation in my apartment in Lakeland. I didn't move to Tampa when I was in Obituary. I stayed in Lakeland, nearby where my family was. And also, the job I had right before I got the gig in Death, which was, before I got the gig in Death, I just stayed in Lakeland because of my family. I'm kind of mixing up my timeline here. So I may have to make little course corrections as I go, because so many things happen in such a condensed time period that it's hard to keep it all in order sometime. But yeah, I think I just stayed by, and my girlfriend lived in Lakeland. So I got an apartment for us in Lakeland, and it was only about a 35-minute commute or so, 40 minutes of traffic, depending on traffic, to get to Tampa, and for rehearsals. So I was just sitting in my room in my apartment in Lakeland, working on this Disincarnate material. Just me and a little Roland 707 drum machine and drum sequencer, as they called it back then, and like a boom box with two microphones for a left and right, and a home cassette deck, double cassette. And I just I'd record drums down to that, and record live a guitar to one side, then I'd do the transfer to the other deck while adding, basically overdubbing the other side guitar, on the other side. It was crazy. And and so this was very time consuming, very labor intensive, sitting there, programming that stuff. It's crazy. I still have, I don't know if you remember those old drum machines, man, but they used to back up. Nowadays, drum sequencers, they just do like a little, they do a little, MIDI dump to like a little file on your computer, on your laptop, or that you can put on your laptop or whatever, a little USB drive, whatever. Back then, they did a dump to cassette tape, and it was a series of like beeps and chirps and all this stuff. So if you wanted to back up, basically one Disincarnate song took up the entire memory of the 707. So, because I use so many different sequences and patterns that I filled every single preset and sequenced those together into my song. Because you had song mode, you had the preset mode, you had banks, and you had presets, just like most things MIDI. And every bank was a different main section of the song. Every preset within each bank was a different section, transition, variation, whatever. And then and then you had go into song mode where you can arrange all those patterns. Go to 2A, to 3C, to, whatever. Put it. I don't remember exactly the way it worked, but it was something like that. And that it would use up the entire memory the damn drum machine. So I had to dump it down to cassette tape. I don't have that drum machine anymore. I don't, but I do have that cassette tape with the beeps and chirps on it.
That's awesome.
And, so it was like that, writing that material. That's what it was. It was sort of, for a long time, it was a solitary, pursuit. It was just me. And, so like, for instance, when Trevor asked me if I had riffs, my head had been so, locked into writing the Disincarnate material that's all I really had to show him at that moment. Like I said, we weren't working. It wasn't like he was saying, yeah, I got this Obituary song. It goes like this, and I need something here. Because that would have been a different, story. But, I just got to say, those guys are good, really good guys. And, I think anyone who knows those guys know they're, chill, laid back dudes. And I was definitely the not chill, not very laid back one. You know what I mean? I was in a difficult time in life. And yeah.
It happens, man.
Yeah, it happens. So Disincarnate, I just wrote a bunch of material and sent it off to Monty at Roadrunner, because he had said, oh, you're working on something? I want to be the first one to hear it. Let me hear it first. And I was like, yeah, sure. Okay, I'll let you hear it first. So I sent him this little crappy tape that I made with the 707 and the the boombox and the deck. And he was just like, man, there's a lot going on here. This could be really cool. I'll tell you what, I want to send you over to Morrisound, give you a little budget to flesh these songs out, to do them for real with vocals and everything. Let me hear what this is like. So I had to find members pronto. And so I started looking for band members, and eventually settled on who I settled on, and we did in fact go into Morrisound. Had to borrow Alex Marquez from 11th Creation and Solstice to lay down the drums, because I had not found a drummer at all. I did in fact have a bass player on that demo, but he was gone by the time the actual album rolled around, so I ended up playing the bass on the album. But yeah.
That's great.
But I had of course Brian Segon and Jason Carmen. Jason, actually, I had not picked him yet by the time we did the demo. I knew about him, but I hadn't tried him out and decided to to hire him. But I did have Brian, and I got Jason through Brian. They were friends, and they had played in a band together prior.
That's awesome. Like, so much there. Like, I remember being able to do the drums with a Casio keyboard, doing multiple tracks that way, and be playing the drums with my fingers and stuff. And have cigarette burns in the keys from sitting there, trying to Van Halen the kick drum, and doing that whole thing. But after you did the Disincarnate stuff, you moved on and did your first solo record, Convergence, and that was an awesome album. That was actually the first time I ever heard Devin Townsend as well was on your album.
Right. Yeah. My solo albums came about, not that long. My first solo album came about not that long after I joined Testament, really.
Oh.
So yeah, they were. I'd already done Low by the time I started.
Right, and you you did the Live at the Fillmore with Testament, you did Low, and then you came back for the Gathering. What was the experience? I mean, at that point, you already worked with Chuck. You'd already been in Obituary. You'd done the Disincarnate stuff, like you'd mentioned. What was the experience like with Testament?
It was sort of a whirlwind, really. I got Disincarnate was had gone on tour to support Dreams. And you got to understand, this was when Nirvana was basically wrecking the underground metal world. All the labels were started thinking, oh, we got to get in on this grunge thing. And bands, a lot of sort of fair weather, fashionable fans, I got to say, I worked at Ace, during the time I was in Death and Obituary, I worked at Ace's Records. which is a very well-known, almost kind of world-famous, record store that used to be in the Tampa area, and it was the place to go to get all your underground stuff, and of course we had the mainstream stuff as well. And I just remember right around that time, right before we went on tour, I would see people that for 2 or 3 years I had been selling, the most extreme death metal stuff to. And I'd see these kids, and this is toward the end of my time at Aces, and because we were getting ready to go, we were getting ready to go to England to record Dreams when this happened. Because I left Aces to go, record the Dreams album and then go on tour. So I had, I left that job, and but right before I left, I just remember the dudes coming in that I had sold death metal to for a couple of years, rolling in. All of a sudden, they're wearing Doc Martens and a flannel, and they got a box with them of all this death metal stuff that they bought from us over the last couple of years, and they wanted to trade it in, and they were getting Nirvana and Soundgarden and Mudhoney and and all that stuff. And I gotta say, I love a lot of that music, but it's in addition to, not in lieu of, not as opposed to, but so many, I saw it enough times. I was just like, man, this Disincarnate is arriving at a very awful time. And so at the end of that tour, it had gone, that tour, I have great memories of that tour. We did a lot of great shows, and we played to a lot of really cool crowds, but they were smallish crowds, but we were playing smallish places. So, a lot of times it looked like pretty packed little place, but there were a number of shows that even in a small place, it looked like the opening band and their friends were there, a couple places. And, so that tour has become one of those tours that when you ask around today, more people went to it than I ever saw at any of those shows. Oh yeah, man, I saw you guys on that tour. Did you though? I believe people when they say they went, but it sort of seems like, looking back on it, that tour was way more popular than it really was at the time. We had a rough time, and it financially was damn near ruinous. And what it did was it led to when taken together with the fact that as we were approaching time to discuss the next album with Roadrunner, they were saying, yeah, we would like to hear some demos to see if we want to exercise our option. And I got to tell you, that was very, I understand that's just business. These days I just understand that as business. Back then I was crestfallen to even hear that coming out of Monty's mouth, and he also was just like, and I really want to hear what Brian sounds like. And he's like, I wasn't that impressed on the album with Brian. He's kind of boring. No, not, that story does not make Brian happy. I know it upsets him, but I obviously like Brian, or I wouldn't have chosen him. And I thought he did a great job on the album, and what have you. But Monty wasn't sold, and I think it's because of the way the music business was going. I mean, they were starting to sign stuff like Grunt Truck and stuff like that, and Tad and bands like that, more grungy, alternative-y acts, and they got rid of a lot of their death metal roster. And when the fact that our tour went really rough on the financial end of things, like I said, we had some great shows, but it went rough on the financial end of things. And then you have your label saying stuff like that to you. It really, because I had chosen really young dudes, and I did it for a reason. I was young. I was only like 24 maybe, but these guys were like 18, 19, and I chose them because I wanted of course, I had a lot of more seasoned guys, interested in joining the band and being a part of it. And I could have chosen those seasoned guys. But a lot of thing about those seasoned guys is, seasoned guys come in with a lot of demands and expectations. Number one, I didn't know I could meet the expectations. And based on how the tour did, I wouldn't have been able to, pay you X salary, to cover your nut back home. I wouldn't have been able to do it. And also, a lot of those guys had other commitments. And so they would come at me with, yeah, I really want to be a part of it. But with the, the caveat being that, I need to be available for this or that. It's, and I also need to make X amount. I'm like, well, if I get young guys that still live at home with their parents, they don't have this big nut they have to make every month. And so we have a little bit more leeway to see whether we're going to be successful or struggle, and also they don't have anything else going on, they don't have some other band that they got a tour coming up with. They don't have, a day job, as they say, where they had to be there, they can only take so much vacation or what have you, So that's why I went with really young guys. But like a lot of swords, that one had another edge to it, and that edge was that these guys were crushed. Their illusions of grandeur of going out in a signed band and being bigger rock stars was smacked around, and also just lacked a somewhat less than enthusiastic reply from the label about a second album.